welcome back. So now that we have some sense of what medieval yogis were trying to do when they practiced Hatha Yoga, if you remember, they were trying to preserve and sublimate the seminal or the kundalini energies. They wanted to turn those energies into the nectar of immortality. But let's now look at the various kinds of practices that these Hatha yogis were actually doing as part of this yoga of forceful exertion. We're going to be following Mallinson's discussion here in his encyclopedia article on Hatha Yoga. His article itself follows a text called the Hatha Pradipika, the manual of Hatha Yoga, and this was written in the 1300s in Sanskrit by an author named Swatama Rama. The Hatha Pradipika became for Hatha Yoga the equivalent to what Patanjali's Yoga Sutras were for classical yoga philosophy. This was a foundational document. It influences all the later writers and practices. Anyway, here's what you do if you're a Hatha yogi or a yogini and you're interested in becoming powerful and immortal. The first step, as Mallinson explains on page 775, is for the yogi or the yogini to set up a small, well-built and solitary hut where they're going to do their practices. Establish a diet of food that's mildly flavored, sweet, unctuous, nourishing, tasty, and eaten in small quantities. Step 2 is somewhat odd. It's a set of bodily cleansing practices that were part of medieval Hatha Yoga, which you're supposed to do regularly, actually, in order to cleanse the body of any defects that it might take on, any pollution, to make it ready for practicing yoga. These cleansing practices were called the Shat Karmani, the 6 actions. Actually, there's not 6 of them, there's 8 that are prescribed in the Hatha Pradipika. Here they go. 1, Dhauti. Clean your entire gastrointestinal system by swallowing a length of cloth and then pulling it back out. 2, Basti, squatting in water, drawing it in through the anus and then expelling it. 3, Neti, inserting a cotton thread into the nostril, pulling it out the mouth, and then drawing it back and forth to clean the sinuses. You might know about Neti pots, right, where this is done with water. Hatha yogis did it with a small string. Trataka, staring at a small object or flame until you start to get tears in your eyes. 5 is Nauli, which involves tensing up the abdomen muscles and then rolling them from side to side to kind of clean your insides like a washing machine. I don't know. 6 is Kapala Bhati. This is to breathe in and out through the nose with force, like a pair of bellows. 7 is Gajakarani. This is to drink water and then regurgitate it in order to clean the stomach. And then 8 is Chakri, to insert a finger into the anus and to rotate it until the sphincter becomes relaxed. Again, as uncomfortable and odd as these might sound, the idea was to focus on the various orifices of the body to make sure that they're all free of pollutants and prepare your body for the yoga practices that are going to come. As you can imagine, these have been abandoned in modern postural yoga. The next step, however, is of course the centerpiece of modern yoga. This is asana, the postures. As Mallinson mentions, while the asanas are mentioned here and there in earlier texts, especially how to sit, seated asanas, the Hatha Pradipika, which was in the 1300s, this teaches 15 postures kind of for the first time. 7 of these are not seated postures. These non-seated postures are an important site where Hatha Yoga engages with other traditions later, like acrobatics, wrestling culture, Sufi traditions, Western bodybuilding and gymnastics. Hatha Yoga itself, the purpose of these asanas is supposed to lead to steadiness, health, and suppleness. Basically no different than today. Some asanas are also able to awaken Kundalini serpent. Others destroy diseases. Others can be used to control the breath. Others can help you control your digestive energies. Maybe we can look at some of these descriptions in detail in our live session. Anyway, the Hatha Pradipika has this list of 15 postures. It eventually grows into a standard list of 84 asanas that most traditional yoga practitioners talk about. Other teachers add even more. B.K.S. Iyengar, in his Light of Yoga book in the 1960s, he describes more than 200 different asanas. After asana, the next part of Hatha Yoga is breath control. Here it's called kumbhaka, holding the breath inside a pot, a kumbha. Mallinson explains on page 778, there were 8 different methods of kumbhaka breath practices that are described in this Hatha Pradipika. These involve different ways to alternate breathing between one nostril and the other, through the mouth and the nostrils. The aim is, again, to cleanse the body, but now it's not the physical body, the gross body, but now it's the second kind of body that we inhabit, which is known as the subtle body, the sukshma sharira. This is thought to be basically mapped right onto our physical bodies. It's made up of channels, nadis, through which breath, life forces, fire, other energies travel. The kumbhaka breath control practices were designed to cleanse these nadis, the channels through which the breath is later going to be used to raise your semen fluids or the kundalini up through the central channel and into the head. Once you've cleansed these nadis, once you've mastered the physical postures and you're able to hold your breath at will, now you're ready for the fourth and final set of activities in Hatha Yoga, which are called the mudras, or the seals. They're also called the bandhas, or locks. These seals and locks, Mallinson explains, are the mechanical means through which a yogi starts to use the breath to move the seminal energies, or the kundalini, up that central channel that's located in the spine and into the cranium. Many of you might be familiar with the 6 chakras. It's not chakras, it's chakras. These 6 chakras are located along the spine between the base and the top of the head. At each of these various locations, there's different kinds of seals or locks that you can put on them to prevent the breath and the seminal energies from going back downwards. So at the base, you have to perform a seal called the Mahamudra, the Great Seal. This activates the Kundalini. It starts it on its way up the Sushumna Nadi, the central subtle channel that goes through your spine. To do this, the yogi brings the heel of his left foot to the crotch, stretches out the right leg, holds the right foot with both hands. Then you sit up straight, you put your chin on your chest, you breathe in, you switch legs, and you repeat. This performs a seal on the base chakra, the Muladhara chakra, and it activates the Kundalini, pushing it upwards. Another important mudra happens at the throat chakra, the Vishuddha chakra. This is the Khechari mudra, or the sky moving seal. Here the yogi practices stretching back the tongue so much that they can turn it backwards and insert it into the cavity behind the soft palate of your mouth. The idea is that this seals that passageway that goes back downwards. It locks the bindu, the seminal energy in the head, allowing you to taste the nectar of immortality that gets created. Then there's a number of other locks and seals. You could do it all the other positions. These are discussed in the Mallinson article. I wanted to mention 2 more mudras. One that's quite commonly featured as a practice, or an asana posture actually, the Viparita Karani, the inverter, where the yogi is inverting himself or herself, usually by doing a headstand or a shoulder stand. Also sometimes by hanging downwards on ropes. Then there's the rather fascinating Vajroli Mudra, which was described as a way to retain any loss of seminal energies by being able to sort of draw up the sexual fluids back into the body through the urethra after intercourse or after unintentional ejaculation. I don't recommend finding out whether this can actually be done, but instead I can refer to you to an essay on this practice by James Mallinson. Mallinson himself had been initiated into the Ramanandi order of Hatha Yoga, and he's written in depth about how this mudra, how other mudras are practiced by actual yogis today. In any case, these mudras, along with the asanas, the kumbhakas, the shatkarmani, the postures, the breathing techniques, the cleansing practices, these make up the 4 dimensions of medieval Hatha Yoga. Now, as for who did these practices, Mallinson mentions on 778, it can be practiced by all, regardless of sex, caste, class, or creed. He explains that the sectarian affiliation and the philosophical inclinations are not important. If duly practiced, Hatha Yoga will work, irrespective of the practitioner's beliefs. This openness, universality made it particularly adaptable, powerful in medieval times even. And in many ways, this Hatha Yoga culture was one of the more widely exported technologies in that second millennium. Hindus did Hatha Yoga, Buddhists and Jains did it. Even Sufis seem to have borrowed ideas. Hatha Yoga texts were translated into Persian by the Mughals. At the end of the essay on page 779, Mallinson explains that while in principle anyone can do Hatha Yoga, in actuality the practices were probably too difficult for householders. Maybe it took too much time to do, right? too much dedication. So mostly they were done by renunciate orders, that meaning monks or nuns who had renounced worldly life, who were living in ashrams in the wilderness in the countryside. In these, he explains there's two major distinct traditions, one which was focused on preservation and sublimation of that bindu, the life energy contained in the seminal fluids. There's two orders today that carry on those Hatha Yoga practices in North India. One is called the Dashanamis, the others are called the Ramanandis. I mentioned that Mallinson himself has been initiated into the Ramanandi tradition. He's an active practitioner, as well as being a professor at SOAS in London. The other major renunciant yoga orders in the medieval period embraced Tantric Shaivism. These folks were interested in the magical arts, in alchemy, goddesses. Actually, they wanted to themselves become Shiva, to become deified. These groups were called the Nath Yogis, and they traced themselves to a guru named Matsyendranath and Gorakhnath. We'll be talking about these fascinating groups as well as the impact generally of tantric thought and practice on this Hatha Yoga in our next session. But till then, let's just keep in mind a few basic takeaway ideas about Hatha Yoga, the 4 different kinds of practices, the idea of this moving the seminal energy or kundalini energy up this nadi, the central subtle channel that goes through the spine so that it can reach that cranial cavity and be transformed into amruta, the nectar of immortality. With a taste of maybe what Hatha Yoga has to offer, let's stop here and we'll see you next time when we talk about the Naths and about Tantra. Till then, thank you for watching. Dhanyawad.